Man rescues elephant swept away by flood, but what the herd does next is heartbreaking. The small gray head disappeared beneath the brown water for the third time in as many minutes. Ravi dropped his fishing net and stepped closer to the riverbank, squinting through the morning haze where the Kaveri River had swollen beyond recognition. What he had mistaken for a floating log was moving against the current with desperate, uneven strokes. The monsoon rains had been relentless for 6 days, transforming the gentle waterway into a churning torrent that carried away everything in its path. The calf's trunk emerged first, a pink-tipped lifeline searching for air above the muddy surface. Her ears, still small and delicate, pressed flat against her skull as she fought to keep her head above water. Each paddle forward seemed to cost her more strength than the last, her movements growing sluggish against the pull of the current. The floodwater had risen 12 feet overnight, swallowing the familiar crossing points where elephant families had safely traversed for generations. Ravi called out to his neighbor, but his voice was lost in the roar of rushing water. The nearest village was 2 kilometers upstream, and the forest department station even farther. By the time help arrived, the little one would be swept into the rapids where the river bent sharply toward the valley. He watched her struggle, noting how her eyes remained fixed on the opposite bank where deep gouges in the mud suggested her family had recently passed. Fresh elephant tracks led away from the water's edge, disappearing into the dense bamboo groves beyond. The calf's breathing had become labored, each exhale creating small puffs of mist in the cool morning air. Her trunk wavered as she tried to navigate around a cluster of debris, broken branches, plastic containers, and a section of someone's roof that spun slowly in the current. She was perhaps 4 months old, still dependent on her mother's milk and guidance, too young to understand why the familiar landscape had transformed into this alien waterscape overnight. Ravi studied the river's flow, calculating distances and timing. His own boat had been secured on higher ground, but reaching it would take precious minutes. The current was strongest in the center channel, where the calf now drifted, but slower near the eastern bank where a fallen tree created a natural eddy. If he could somehow guide her toward that calmer water, she might have a chance to rest and regain strength. The fisherman had lived beside this river for 37 years, had seen floods before, but never one that separated a baby from her herd. Elephants were intelligent enough to seek higher ground when the waters rose, but in their haste to escape, family groups sometimes became scattered. The mother would be searching frantically, following the riverbank and calling with low-frequency rumbles that could travel for miles through the forest. But the rushing water masked all sounds, creating an impenetrable barrier between the lost calf and any response from her family. As if sensing his attention, the young elephant turned her head toward shore. Their eyes met across the churning distance, hers dark and confused, reflecting a trust that seemed almost heartbreaking in its simplicity. She made a soft, questioning sound, barely audible above the river's roar, a call that spoke of exhaustion and growing fear. The current pulled her steadily downstream, each passing second carrying her further from the safety of shallow water and closer to the dangerous rapids that lay ahead. Ravi moved with quiet purpose, retrieving the coiled rope from beside his nets without taking his eyes off the struggling calf. The thick hemp had served him well through years of river work, strong enough to secure boats during storms and flexible enough to handle with wet hands. He tested the knots one final time, then waded into the shallows where the water immediately tugged at his legs with surprising force. The current here was deceptive, gentle on the surface but powerful enough to sweep away anyone who lost their footing. The calf had drifted another 30 meters downstream, her movements becoming increasingly erratic as exhaustion set in. Her trunk now barely cleared the water's surface, and her calls had grown weaker, more infrequent. Ravi knew he had perhaps an hour before the river's relentless pull would carry her beyond help. He moved deeper, feeling his way along the submerged bank where familiar rocks and fallen logs provided temporary handholds. The water reached his chest, cold and thick with silt that reduced visibility to mere inches. When he was close enough to be heard, Ravi began speaking in the soft, rhythmic tones he used to calm nervous animals. "Easy now, little one." His voice carried across the water, gentle and steady. The calf's ears twitched at the sound, and she turned toward him with visible confusion. Her eyes, wide with fear and fatigue, tracked his slow approach. She had likely never seen a human this close, and every instinct told her to flee, but the rushing water left her no choice but to remain suspended in this terrifying limbo. Ravi extended the rope gradually, allowing it to float on the current rather than throwing it directly. The calf flinched as the hemp brushed against her side, but she was too tired to thrash away. Her breathing had become shallow and rapid, each exhale creating small clouds of vapor in the cool morning air. The fisherman circled slowly, positioning himself upstream where he could use the current to his advantage rather than fighting against it. Years of reading water patterns told him exactly where the flow would carry them both if his plan succeeded. The process required infinite patience. Each time Ravi attempted to loop the rope around the calf's chest, she would panic and paddle frantically, using precious energy reserves. He learned to time his movements with her breathing, approaching during the brief moments when exhaustion forced her to rest. Her trunk, that remarkable appendage capable of such precision and strength, now moved sluggishly through the water, occasionally touching his arm as if trying to understand this strange creature who spoke in calm tones and moved without aggression. 2 hours passed before Ravi managed to secure the rope in a gentle harness around her front legs and chest. The calf had stopped struggling, her energy spent, trusting this human presence through sheer necessity. Her head barely remained above water now, and her calls had become little more than soft whimpers. The fisherman began the delicate task of guiding her toward the eastern bank, using the current's natural flow to carry them both toward the calmer water near the fallen tree. Progress was measured in meters, sometimes mere inches. The calf's cooperation came in waves, moments of trust followed by sudden fear when debris bumped against her or when the rope shifted position. Ravi maintained constant verbal contact, his voice becoming hoarse from hours of gentle encouragement. His own strength was waning, the cold water and constant tension having numbed his limbs, but the young elephant's gradual movement toward safety sustained his determination. As afternoon light filtered through the canopy, the calf's front feet finally touched the muddy bottom near shore. Her legs trembled with effort as she found purchase on solid ground, water streaming from her gray hide as she slowly emerged from the river that had held her captive since dawn. The calf stood on trembling legs beside the muddy bank, water still dripping from her ears as she tested her footing on solid ground. Ravi remained in the shallows, giving her space while keeping the rope loose around her chest, ready to provide support if she stumbled. Her breathing had steadied, though her small frame still shuddered with exhaustion. She made soft, questioning sounds toward the forest, calls that seemed to carry both relief and confusion as she oriented herself in this familiar yet transformed landscape. The first sign came as a low rumble that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Ravi felt the vibration through his feet before he heard the sound, a deep communication that elephants use to coordinate across vast distances. The calf's ears immediately spread wide, her entire body becoming alert as she lifted her trunk to catch scents carried on the evening breeze. From the dense bamboo grove beyond the floodline, shadows began to move with deliberate purpose. The matriarch emerged first, her massive frame parting the vegetation as she stepped into the clearing. Behind her, 5 more elephants followed in careful single file, the calf's extended family, drawn by calls that human ears could barely detect. Their approach was measured and cautious, each step placed with the wisdom that comes from decades of navigating both human presence and natural disasters. The matriarch's eyes remained fixed on the small figure standing beside the strange human who smelled of river water and rope. Ravi slowly removed the harness, his movements deliberate and respectful as the family group drew nearer. The calf made several attempts to run toward them but stumbled with each effort, her legs still weak from hours in the current. "Go on, little one," Ravi whispered, stepping back to give her clear passage. The matriarch approached with remarkable gentleness, her trunk extending to touch her young family member, examining her for injury while offering the comfort of familiar scent and contact. What happened next defied every expectation Ravi had built through years of observing wildlife along the river. The matriarch turned toward him, her ancient eyes holding a depth that seemed to acknowledge something beyond simple animal instinct. She approached slowly, her massive head lowered in a gesture that conveyed neither threat nor submission, but something closer to recognition. Her trunk, capable of uprooting trees or delicately plucking a single leaf, reached out to touch his shoulder with surprising gentleness. One by one, each member of the herd followed the matriarch's lead. The second eldest female approached and repeated the gesture, her trunk briefly resting against Ravi's arm. A young bull, perhaps the calf's sibling, touched the fisherman's back with careful precision. Each contact lasted only seconds, but carried a weight that spoke of understanding across species lines. The forest grew quiet except for the soft sounds of elephant breathing and the distant murmur of receding floodwater. The matriarch gathered her family with subtle shifts in posture and nearly inaudible rumbles. The exhausted calf, now surrounded by protective relatives, managed to walk steadily as the group began their journey back into the forest. They moved like shadows between the trees, their massive forms disappearing into the green depths with surprising grace. The last sound Ravi heard was a gentle rumble drifting back through the bamboo, a final acknowledgement that seemed to hang in the evening air long after the elephants had vanished.